The Zorlak warrior grinned wickedly as he fired a sonic blast into 8-year-old Aiden's skull, splattering the human child's brains across the dirt. The vicious alien had no idea that Aiden's father, Stephen Hall, was a genetically enhanced super soldier hell-bent on revenge. Stephen was just a humble mechanic now, working a wrench on a malfunctioning plasma drill in a dimly lit Ferengi mining facility. Flashing warning lights strobed as he meticulously repaired damaged circuits. An alarm suddenly blared and the facility rumbled. Stephen sniffed, smelling burnt explosives. His modified ears heard panicked shouts and weapons fire outside. "Work faster, human." Karos, Stephen's sneering Ferengi supervisor, barged into the room. "Those drills need to be extracting torthite for profit, not sitting broken." Stephen ignored the insults, his hands moving in a focused blur as he resoldered connections. More explosions boomed. Karos's eyes widened in fear. He turned and ran. Stephen grabbed his plasma rifle and sprinted outside into hell. Swarms of insectoid Zorlak marauders were attacking, armed with devastating sonic cannons. Outmatched Ferengi security forces crumpled, their energy shields useless. Miners were dragged screaming into the Zorlak's grotesque tentacled maws. Stephen scanned the chaos, searching for his son, Aiden. A Zorlak emerged from smoking rubble, Aiden's 8-year-old body dangling limply from the creature's claws, head a cratered, bloody ruin. "Nursu!" Stephen howled. Rage and anguish surged through him. His neural combat implants activated, adrenaline and aggression-amplifying stims flooding his veins. Enhanced muscles coiled beneath his skin as decades of special forces training took over. He charged at the Zorlak with superhuman speed, an unearthly roar tearing from his throat. The alien's four eyes widened in surprise as Stephen descended upon it in a whirlwind of violence. It raised its sonic cannon to fire, but Stephen was faster. He whipped his plasma rifle around and shot, vaporizing the Zorlak's head in a burst of sizzling green gore. But it was too late. Aiden was dead, cradled in his grieving father's arms. Despair filled Stephen, quickly replaced by cold fury. He gently laid his son's corpse down, then stood to face the attacking Zorlak horde, murder in his eyes. These aliens had no idea who they had just angered. A genetically engineered super soldier with nothing left to lose. They were about to learn the true meaning of humanity's wrath. Before Stephen could reach the Zorlak holding Aiden's corpse, an ear-splitting shriek filled the air. A sonic blast slammed into his chest, hurling him backwards. He crashed to the ground, bones snapping on impact. His vision swam, darkening at the edges. Through the haze of pain, he saw the Zorlak warrior roughly toss Aiden's lifeless body into a waiting transport shuttle. The alien ship's engines roared to life as it began to lift off. Stephen's breath came in ragged gasps. His entire body was a blaze of agony, but a cold, implacable rage burned hotter. He gritted his teeth and focused, willing his shattered limbs to move. His cybernetic aggression system implants activated, flooding his bloodstream with enhanced combat stimulants and fast-acting nanobots that knitted bones and stitched torn flesh. He staggered to his feet, injuries already healing, and sprinted towards the colony's armory. The reinforced metal door was locked, but Stephen barely slowed. He slammed into it shoulder first, tearing it off its hinges with a screech of tortured metal. Inside the armory, his gaze fell upon two pieces of experimental hardware. A massive railgun, all sleek black metal and humming coils, and a powered exoskeleton designed for heavy industrial work. Ignoring the prominent warning labels, Stephen stepped into the exoskeleton. It whirred and clicked as it conformed to his body, augmenting his strength and speed. He grabbed the railgun, its targeting system automatically interfacing with his CAS implants. A glowing HUD sprang to life in his vision, highlighting vectors and trajectories. Stephen charged out of the armory, servos in the exoskeleton whining. He skidded to a stop and raised the railgun, taking aim at the rapidly disappearing speck of the Zorlak transport. The weapon thrummed with barely restrained power as he lined up the shot, a desperate plan taking shape in his mind. The range was extreme, even for a hypervelocity railgun, but he had no choice. He couldn't let them take his son. Jaw clenched, finger tight on the trigger, Stephen fired. With a deafening crack and a blinding flash, the railgun round blasted forth, crossing the distance in a heartbeat. It punched clean through the transport's hull in a shower of debris and sparks. The craft lurched drunkenly, smoke pouring from the fresh hole, then veered away, vanishing into the clouds. Discarding the railgun, Stephen sprinted to the colony's hangar, servos whining with each step. His ship was prepped and ready, a heavily modified Ferengi scout vessel bristling with aftermarket weapons and illicit speed upgrades. As he clambered into the cockpit, a voice called out. It was Karos, his Ferengi overseer, battered and limping. "Stop, you can't do this!" Karos shouted, his voice filled with pain and fear in equal measure. Stephen met his gaze with eyes of ice and steel. No words were needed. He slammed the cockpit shut, fingers already dancing over the controls. The ship's engines howled to life. Jaw set with a singular purpose, Stephen opened the throttle all the way. The ship leaped forward, pinning him to his seat from the acceleration. Stephen's scout ship rocketed through the upper atmosphere, the metal groaning and heating up as he pushed it past its design limits. His CAS implants interfaced directly with the ship's systems, coaxing every last drop of power from the straining engines. Following the fading ion trail left by the Zorlak transport, Stephen's sensors soon picked up a massive spacecraft, looming in low orbit. It was a Zorlak Ravager, a heavily armed monstrosity bristling with weapons and external docking clamps. Several smaller vessels were clutched in its grasp, undoubtedly the spoils of previous raids. Stephen gritted his teeth as his scans confirmed the transport had indeed docked with the Ravager. There was no time to waste. He slammed the throttle forward, sending his ship hurtling towards the behemoth. Immediately, a hail of plasma fire erupted from the Ravager's point defense batteries, filling the void with deadly energy. Stephen wrenched the controls, sending his ship into a dizzying roll. The universe spun madly as he jinked and wove through the onslaught. The hull of his ship growing hot as near misses flashed by. As he neared the Ravager's hull, Stephen cut the engines and slapped the release for the ship's grappling harpoon. The barbed projectile shot forth, trailing a carbon nanofiber cable, and embedded itself into an airlock mere meters from where the Zorlak transport was docked. The Ravager's lasers found their mark, slicing into Stephen's ship. He was already moving, leaping from the disintegrating vessel in his battle-scarred exoskeleton. The icy void of space enveloped him, but his CAS implants kept him safe, recycling his air and regulating his temperature. He hit the Ravager's hull with a clang that reverberated through his bones. Maglocks in his boots clamped down, holding him fast. With a grunt of effort, he grasped the edges of the airlock, his exo-enhanced muscles straining, and heaved. Metal shrieked as the airlock door was wrenched open, atmosphere venting in a white cloud. Stephen clambered inside, mag boots thudding on the deck. The airlock slammed shut behind him, klaxons blaring, lights flashing red. A door hissed open, and a dozen Zorlak warriors poured into the corridor, insectoid eyes glinting, sonic rifles aimed squarely at Stephen's chest. He bared his teeth in a feral snarl, the servos in his exoskeleton whining as he launched himself forward. A primal battle cry tore from his throat, echoing off the bulkheads. The Zorlak opened fire, the air filling with the ear-splitting shrieks of their sonic weapons. But Stephen was already among them, a whirlwind of mechanically enhanced fury. His armored fists slammed into chitin and flesh, the exoskeleton granting him the strength of 10 men. Zorlak warriors flew backward, smashing into walls, their carapaces cracking under the onslaught. Green ichor splattered the corridor as Stephen tore into them, all thoughts of restraint or mercy consumed by the all-encompassing need to find his son. More warriors poured into the corridor, heedless of their fallen brethren, their shrieks mixing with the clamor of alarms. Stephen met them head-on, his face a mask of rage, fists and feet lashing out in a berserk dance of destruction. He would carve a path to Aden through the heart of this ship, even if he had to tear it apart deck by deck. Nothing would stop him, not the hordes of Zorlak warriors, not the tons of armored hull surrounding him, not the cold vacuum of space itself. He was a man with a singular purpose, an unstoppable force driven by love and rage in equal measure, and the Zorlak were about to learn the true depths of a father's wrath. The corridor erupted into a frenzied storm of violence. Stephen became a whirlwind of destruction, his exoskeleton-enhanced body moving with inhuman speed and precision. He dodged and weaved through the hail of sonic blasts, his CAS implants calculating vectors and trajectories faster than conscious thought. His armored fist slammed into a Zorlak warrior's thorax, with a sickening crunch chitin and ichor spraying. Another Zorlak lunged, thrusting with a crackling energy glaive, but Stephen sidestepped, grabbing the weapon and shattering it over his knee. He ripped a sonic cannon from the grip of a fallen foe and wielded it like a bludgeon, smashing it into the face of another Zorlak with a wet crunch. Armor buckled and bone shattered under his relentless assault. The remaining Zorlaks fell back in disarray, hastily erecting portable energy barriers to cover their retreat. The shimmering fields sizzled and spat as Stephen slammed into them, his exoskeleton servos whining with the effort. Each barrier fell before his onslaught, but at a cost. Warning lights flashed on his HUD as the exoskeleton's power cells drained with each impact. Suddenly a piercing scream echoed through the ship, rising above the clamor of battle. It was Aiden, his voice raw with terror and agony. The sound tore into Stephen like a serrated blade, flooding his veins with icy dread. With a roar of desperate fury, he charged forward, smashing through the final barrier in a shower of sparks. The exoskeleton groaned in protest, hydraulics straining, but he pushed on. He found himself in a cavernous chamber that was a grotesque blend of a trophy room and a torture chamber. The walls were lined with the mounted heads and preserved corpses of dozens of alien species, their dead eyes seeming to watch him in silent judgment. In the center of the room stood a massive Zorlak, towering over Aiden's crumpled form. The warlord held a cruel, serrated blade, stained with the boy's blood. He turned to face Stephen, compound eyes glinting with sadistic glee. "Ah, the child's sire," the Zorlak rasped in a guttural, mocking tone. "Come to join him in death?" Stephen's gaze locked with Aiden's. The boy's eyes were wide with fear and pain, silently pleading for his father to save him. In that moment, the rest of the universe fell away. There was only the promise that passed between them, a silent vow from father to son. "I'm coming. I will save you." Stephen's vision narrowed, his heartbeat thundering in his ears. His CAS implants flooded his system with combat stimulants, the world seeming to slow around him. He lunged forward, servos screaming, a primal battle cry on his lips. The Zorlak warlord braced for the impact, raising his jagged blade, a vicious grin splitting his face. The Zorlak warlord met Stephen's charge with a thunderous impact, their bodies crashing together in a whirlwind of violence. The alien's strength was immense, his movements precise and deadly, honed by a lifetime of conquest and slaughter. Stephen's exoskeleton strained to match the warlord's might, servos whining, power cells blinking warnings across his HUD. But Stephen fought with the unrelenting fury of a father whose child was in mortal peril. They traded blows that would have shattered a normal human's bones, the chamber ringing with the cacophony of their battle. Stephen's CAS implants pushed his battered body to its absolute limits and beyond, muscles tearing and bones fracturing with each earth-shattering impact. The warlord's serrated blade slashed, drawing blood and sparks as it scraped across Stephen's armor. Stephen retaliated with a pneumatic-driven punch that cracked chitin and sent the warlord staggering. But the alien recovered quickly, retaliating with a flurry of blows that left dents in Stephen's exoskeleton. Warnings flashed red in Stephen's vision. His armor was failing, its power nearly spent. In a final desperate gambit, he lunged forward, tackling the warlord in a grapple. With a thought, he initiated the exoskeleton's emergency overload, pouring every last ounce of power into its reactor. The suit began to glow, heat radiating off it in shimmering waves as its core went critical. The warlord's eyes widened in sudden understanding, and it thrashed in Stephen's grip, but he held on with the strength of a man who had nothing left to lose. "For Aiden!" Stephen roared, voice filled with anguish and rage. The exoskeleton detonated in a cataclysmic explosion. a miniature supernova that engulfed both Stephen and the warlord in its searing embrace. The shockwave shattered the chamber, sending alien corpses and twisted shards of metal flying. As the fires died down and the smoke began to clear, a figure stirred amidst the devastation. It was Stephen, his armor now a blackened ruin, his flesh seared and broken. With a Herculean effort, he dragged himself across the debris-strewn floor, leaving a trail of blood in his wake. His vision was fading, darkness encroaching, but he fixed his gaze on a small still form lying amidst the rubble. Aidan. With the last of his strength, Stephen reached his son and gathered him into his arms, cradling him against his chest. Tears carved tracks through the soot and blood on his face as he held his boy close. Around them, the Ravager shuddered and quaked, the explosion in the chamber setting off a chain reaction in the ship's power core. Klaxons blared, the very air seeming to vibrate with the force of the impending destruction. But Stephen paid it no heed, the universe narrowing down to just him and Aidan, together at the end as they should be. As fire raced through the ship's corridors and explosions tore through its hull, Stephen closed his eyes, a final thought drifting through his fading mind. "I'm sorry, Aidan," he whispered, his voice lost amidst the roar of the disintegrating ship. "I wasn't fast enough, but your mother is waiting for us. There is—" The Ravager exploded in a brilliant flash, a miniature sun blooming in the void of space. The Zorlak threat had been ended, their flagship destroyed and their warlord slain. But the cost had been too high, paid in the blood of the innocent. In the heart of the inferno, as metal melted and atoms split, father and son embraced one final time, united in death as they had been in life. You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.